Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we unpack the stories hidden and the information you share with us. Today, we're stepping inside the time cabin to face a really chilling mystery, Jack the Ripper. We've got some incredible material you've sent in about this specter from Victorian London. Our mission today is to try and cut through the fog, the myths, and understand what might have really happened and why the story still, well, grips us so tightly. We have your sources here covering the crimes, the society back then, the media storm, and the Ripper's legacy. And our expert is here to guide us through this pretty dark chapter. Ready to delve into the shadows?
Absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it, how quickly this figure, Jack the Ripper, almost became larger than life. It's like people needed a name, a face, almost, for the fear that was just taking over the East End.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that. The time cabin takes us back first to April 3rd, 1888, a grim starting point. What happened then?
Well, that date, it's maybe not one of the famous canonical 5 dates, but it's definitely significant. A woman in the East End, she was found and rushed to hospital with just terrible injuries. Head, face, internal trauma. She died the next day. And while, her death isn't officially one of the 5, it really kicked off this period of intense fear in Whitechapel. And it's striking how soon after attacks like these started, that name, Jack the Ripper, began doing the rounds. It really shows how we try to personify something terrifying and unknown, doesn't it?
It really does. Man, myth or message? That question hangs there right from the start. Okay, so then we get to the 5 canonical murders. What sets these apart?
Right, the canonical 5. What makes them stand out is the sheer brutality, yes, but also some disturbing patterns, how the victims were targeted, the nature of the attacks. Your sources really detail the extreme violence. Throats cut deeply, sometimes right down to the spine, and then these awful mutilations afterwards. Organs removed, a kidney in one case, a heart in another. What's really chilling, and your material mentions this, is the almost, well, some reports suggest an almost surgical precision in parts of it.
It's hard to even comprehend, and this was all happening in a really small area.
Exactly. All 5 canonical murders happened within roughly a 1-mile radius in Whitechapel. Think about that. This intense terror, focused geographically, but it paralyzed the whole city, and eventually the world knew about it. And adding to the whole mystery, these attacks were nocturnal, usually in the dead of night, early hours, and the killer just vanished. Your sources highlight the lack of, well, what we'd consider basic clues today. No fingerprints, no clear footprints, and despite it being a crowded area, no reliable witnesses seemed to emerge immediately, or maybe they did. One source hints, or so we think, which just adds another layer of doubt.
Yeah, that uncertainty is key. To really get a feel for it, we need to understand the setting. The time cabin sources paint a pretty grim picture of London's East End in 1888. Can you set that scene?
Oh, absolutely. You can't understand the Rippers without understanding Whitechapel then. London was huge, over 5.5 million people, and the East End bore the brunt of that explosive growth. Whitechapel was, well, it was synonymous with overcrowding, poverty on a scale that's hard to grasp today, and disease was everywhere. One source calls it hell on earth, and honestly that might not be too far off. Think families packed into single rooms, sky-high infant mortality, choking coal, smog, the smell of sewage. It was grim.
And just the basic living conditions. Terrible.
Utterly. Your material talks about the lack of clean water for so many, no proper sanitation, rats, bugs, constant companions, diseases like TB, dysentery, cholera, they thrive there. It was just a breeding ground for misery and desperation. And you need to understand that context to see how vulnerable the victims were.
Right, which brings us to the victims. The material from the time cabin calls them unfortunates. Tell us more about these women.
Unfortunates. Yeah, that was the rather detached Victorian term for women involved in sex work, often just to survive. Your sources mention how just a few pence might get you a spot on a floor for the night. 4 pence for a bed, maybe 8 for a shared mattress. Desperate stuff.
So they were all prostitutes.
Well, that's an important clarification your material makes. Not all the canonical victims were full-time sex workers. Some sold flowers, some were cleaners, seamstresses, trying to scrape by however they could. The real unifying factor, as your sources argue, wasn't necessarily their job, but their shared condition. Extreme poverty, often homelessness, and being socially isolated. No safety net. That's what made them such easy targets.
And then into this already fearful environment comes the legend making, those letters.
Yes, the letters. It's amazing how quickly that persona was constructed. Your material highlights that famous one, written in red ink, sent to a news agency. It mocked the police, promised more killing, and it was signed, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." That's the first time we see that name linked to the crimes. Then came another letter, supposedly with part of a human kidney, also signed Jack. That just ramped up the horror and cemented the name in everyone's minds.
But there's debate about whether those first letters were even real, right? From the killer.
Oh, huge debate. Still is. Their authenticity is really contentious. But, as your sources point out, real or not, their impact was massive, undeniable. The press went wild. Jack the Ripper was just so much more evocative, terrifying than the official Whitechapel murder attack.
It stuck.
It absolutely stuck. And then thousands more letters followed, well, certainly hoaxes, people jumping on the bandwagon. But those early ones, they birthed the legend, fueled the panic, a powerful example of how a narrative can just take over.
Like creating a monster in real time. Speaking of which, the investigation didn't exactly go smoothly, did it?
No, your sources are pretty clear on the massive problems the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police faced. You have to remember the time. 19th century policing tools were limited, to say the least.
Right.
No fingerprinting as we know it. Forensic science was basically non-existent. No DNA, obviously. And your material points out something crucial. Crime scenes were often contaminated. Victims moved, sometimes clean, before proper photos could even be taken. Evidence potentially lost forever.
So they were fighting a losing battle from the start, in a way.
In many ways, yeah. They did a lot of work, interviewed thousands, arrested over 80 people at various points. But no concrete leads ever emerged. No suspect they could actually charge with enough evidence. Your sources mentioned some theories they floated, maybe a butcher, because of the cuts. Maybe a doctor, again, the precision. Or a sailor, someone transient who can slip in and out via the docks. But nothing solid. They were baffled.
And I guess that lack of an answer is why we have this parade of suspects over the last century plus. Everyone seems to have a theory.
Exactly. Your material gives a glimpse into that rogues gallery. It's quite something. You've got suggestions ranging from a Polish immigrant with mental health issues living nearby to a barber who poisoned his wives. Even Lewis Carroll, bizarre.
Lewis Carroll, seriously?
Seriously.
Yeah.
It shows how the absence of facts creates this vacuum, right? People project their own ideas, fears, narratives onto it. Leads to some wild speculation.
And then there's the really sensational stuff, Jill the Ripper, the royal conspiracies.
Yeah, and your sources correctly flag these as highly unlikely, but definitely captivating. The idea of a female killer, Jill the Ripper, or these elaborate plots involving Prince Albert Victor, a royal surgeon, Freemasons covering things up.
Sounds like a movie plot.
It does, and that's the appeal, isn't it? Nobility, scandal, secret societies, it makes for a great story. But as your material stresses, the appeal is in the narrative drama, not in any credible evidence connecting them to the actual murders.
It feels like the mystery itself became a blank canvas. But your sources also make a really crucial point, how these murders expose some ugly truths about Victorian London.
Absolutely. This is a key takeaway. The Ripper killings didn't just cause fear. They shone a harsh light on the deep social divides. The East End was diverse, yes, but it was also where marginalized groups often ended up migrants, refugees, the desperately poor, often invisible, easily scapegoated. Your sources mention Irish dock workers, Jewish tailors groups already facing prejudice.
And that prejudice flared up during the Ripper Scare itself.
Disturbingly, yes. There was anti-Semitic graffiti found near one crime scene, completely baseless, of course, but it led to anti-Jewish riots in the area. It shows how the fear and anxiety could be twisted, turned against vulnerable communities. The Ripper, tragically, became a focus point for all sorts of wider anxieties about immigration, poverty, changing social structures.
And the media. The newspapers played a huge role in amplifying all this. The Time Cabin's material mentions these early tabloids.
Oh, massively.
Yeah.
The timing was perfect in a grim way. Cheap mass circulation newspapers were just taking off. These halfpenny dreadfuls, as they were sometimes called, needed sensational stories to sell copies. And Jack the Ripper, that was pure gold for them.
So they just ran with anything.
Pretty much. Your sources describe how they sensationalized everything, graphic autopsy details, wild rumors from the street. They printed fake letters, published completely unsubstantiated sketches of suspects. Accuracy wasn't the main goal, circulation was.
It sounds like they weren't just reporting the story, they were actively shaping it, maybe even adding to it.
That's a provocative idea your material raises. Did journalists invent the name Jack the Ripper? Did they write some of those early infamous letters themselves, just to fuel the fire and sell papers? We can't know for sure, but what's undeniable is how effectively they shaped public perception and drove the panic. A stark reminder of media power even back then.
And in the end, he was never caught. That fact alone is huge.
It's fundamental to the enduring infamy, isn't it? The lack of resolution. He got away with it. And so he transforms into this this archetype. The shadowy killer in the fog top hat, cloak, blade, it's iconic. Your sources point out how he's everywhere in pop culture books, films, even Ripper tours in London today.
Yeah.
He's embedded in our consciousness.
And it wasn't just about scary stories, right? Your material from the Time Cabin says it influenced detective work in fiction.
Definitely. The sheer frustration of the Ripper case arguably pushed police forces to develop better methods later on. They saw the limitations. It also fueled the rise of detective fiction writers trying to solve the puzzle in stories that the real police couldn't crack. And the attempts to understand why he did it, even without knowing who he was, laid some groundwork for what we now call criminal profiling, trying to get inside the mind based on the crime. So, as your sources conclude, Jack the Ripper is more than just a killer. He's become this symbol, really, a symbol of societal fears, the unknown, and unresolved injustice.
Over a century on, the gaslights might be gone from Whitechapel, but that shadow, Jack the Ripper's shadow, it definitely lingers. As we've seen today in our deep dive here in the Time Cabin, this isn't just about horrible crimes, it's really a window, isn't it? Into a specific time, a place, revealing all those anxieties about poverty, class, immigration, the power of the media.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating, I think, is how the lack of an answer has allowed the legend to just keep growing, keep changing. It reflects our own ongoing struggle, maybe, to understand the darkest parts of human behavior and the societies that sometimes allow such things to happen. Which leads to a pretty interesting question for everyone listening, perhaps. In today's world, saturated with information, speculation everywhere, what does the enduring appeal of an unsolved case like Jack the Ripper really tell us about our own need for closure, our need for understanding, or maybe even our need for a clear villain in a world that often feels pretty chaotic?
A chilling thought indeed to take with you from the Time Cabin. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope this exploration has shed some light, not just on the darkness of the past, but maybe on some complexities that are still with us today until our next journey.